We're back again with Ted Hahn, clinical nutritionist. I'm Dr. Odell, and today we're going to dive into inflammation. That's not an easy topic. I mean, I know you and I have had some long discussions, but I was pretty impressed with your biochemistry when we talked about that before.
Well, I mean, everybody out there, if they're alive, they've been inflamed at one point or another. And as we all know, inflammation causes pain, and nobody wants to be in pain. So the first thing, your typical person does when they're in pain is, if it's not over the top and overwhelming, they'll go to CVS or wherever and buy some Advil or some Excedrin or Excedrin PM if they have to sleep. Over-the-counter, non-narcotic pain relievers. And do they reduce pain? Do they make you feel better? Yeah, in the short term, they work. But they do have side effects if you take them on a long-term basis, which a lot of people do. It's kind of hard on the liver. It can be kind of hard on the digestive system, depending on what type you're taking.
And even the mitochondria, I was just reading about that lately, talking about how damaging it is and how difficult it is, for doctors, like we're trying to get things to heal, and it's like counterproductive, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you really get into the biochemistry of inflammation, you find out that it's a linear sequential process. And if you jump in there and interrupt that process, all in the sake of reducing pain levels, then you don't get to the point that's called in inflammation language resolution. And resolution is when your body has actually repaired itself and returns to more or less the uninjured state it was in before you experienced whatever you did that caused the inflammation. And there's lots of things that cause inflammation. It can be viral, bacterial. Lots of inflammation comes from the gut. When the gut gets infected, then it spreads to the rest of the body because the gut feeds everything, good stuff and bad stuff. So if you have bad stuff going on in the gut, that gets the inflammatory process that's initiated there can spread to other parts of the body, and then you have patients that come in and say, what, I hurt all over.
Yeah.
My joints hurt, everything that moves hurts, my back, my knees, my ankles. And so if it gets overwhelming enough, then you have patients that graduate from over-the-counter pain relievers to, the big boys, stuff with hydrocodone in it.
Yeah.
And that, we're all aware of what kind of problems that can cause.
Big problems. But I mean, people also need to realize that inflammation is a normal process. It's just keeping it under control, right? Like, I mean, why is it in our country that we have so many, everybody's inflamed, right?
Yeah, pretty much at this point.
I mean, everybody's already here, so when you have something where your body should have a normal chemical, normal response to, like if you go out and, bump your elbow or whatever, like, you're supposed to have an inflammatory response so it can heal, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Are we all just already elevated because of, why?
Well, part of it is diet, okay? Many of the foods that we eat on a regular basis are inflammatory. In other words, they cause a chemical reaction in the body that creates inflammation. Too much sugar can do that. Hard alcohol can do that. there's lots of things we can put into our body that generally, I digress a little bit. Let me go back to food, okay? So the first place all our food goes, obviously, is our stomach, and then from the stomach it goes into the intestinal system. If it gets dissolved into a liquid, which it should be, we'll talk about digestion another time, but if these are inflammation-causing compounds, once they get into the gut, you have an inflammatory process that starts there and spreads out into the rest of the body. For instance, I'll use myself as an example. I had an autoimmune condition called reactive arthritis, which is kind of like,
which sucks.
Yeah, it's like rheumatoid arthritis on angel dust. Okay, it's really bad, painful stuff. But that came from a gut infection, a particular type of pathogenic bacteria. I ate some bad sushi or something and got this infection, and my gut actually cleared it, but the inflammatory response that initiated in the gut with the bad bacteria spread to my joints, and that caused the immune system, I should say antibodies in the immune system, to start attacking the soft tissue in my wrists, my elbows, my shoulders, my knees, every place there was a joint hurt. And so, the logical thing to do, I thought, would be take a bunch of products for healthy joint function, and of course they did nothing at all, which made me really scratch my head. So I went to a doctor that was far smarter than I was, and he said, look, the problem is your gut and the inflammatory process, not the joints in and of themselves. And so once we change the focus to bringing that inflammation in the gut down, all the joint problems self-rectified without taking any joint products at all. So, the first thing people do when they start feeling joint pain, particularly if they're older, is they get on something they probably saw on TV or that a friend told them about it, they read about in that great myriad of aging, please try to stay healthy magazines, osteobiflex, all these different things that are out there. And very often, that's not what's needed. What's needed is to get the inflammation down so that the body can repair. Because if the body's in a really inflamed state, it can't repair itself. It's like trying to change a wall plug without turning the breaker off. More often than not, you get a nice dose of house current through your fingers.
Yes.
And then you go, I guess I'll go turn the breaker off. And so that's the concept here, is get the inflammation down, turn the breaker off so you can actually do the repair.
And I think that, and I know I'm guessing we're going to talk about omegas a little bit in this process too. Actually, let's just talk about that. So, I see patients, and some patients, they're pretty worn out, and they, have some sort of, chronic pain. So, I'm always looking at strategies not only to, fix the problem the best I can, but strategies just, overall. If we can take somebody that comes in and, they're chronically at a 5 or 6, and we can drop that down to a 1 or 2, that's life-changing, even if we can't, fix the problem because it's worn out or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we die eventually. we're going to get to the point where we hit a period in our lives where we're getting diminishing returns, even if we're doing everything right. I mean, that's just the natural process of aging. But unlike Western medical that blames everything that's wrong with you on aging, you can make some enormous differences in the way a patient feels, even if they're an older patient. When I was really, really inflamed, I've worked out all my life, and then I started going to the gym with my son, my teenage son, who wanted to best me, who wanted to show that dad was getting old and weak. And at the time I was, he was over on the free weight side of the gym, doing deadlifts and squats and bench presses, and I'm over on the machine side, just trying to find a range of motion I could stay in that wouldn't hurt. And, that was probably in my mid-50s. I'm 60 now, and now I'm back to doing bench presses and military presses and deadlifts and all the other things I like to do, because with the proper nutritional augmentation, I was able to achieve what we talked about earlier, which was resolution. So what most, what's the word I'm looking for? Health-oriented practitioners, real ones like chiropractors, what they do, or what we've been doing for years and years, is giving patients anti-inflammatory herbs like boswellia, like turmeric, things of that nature. And they do great things in terms of reducing inflammation, but we're only solving half the problem. In other words, what we're doing is the same thing Western medical does, we're just using more benign products. Okay? All we're doing is reducing inflammation. Reducing inflammation and repairing tissue are two different things. So yes, we do have to reduce inflammation to the point where tissue repair can start to take place, because if we're in a hyperinflamed state, then repair can't take place. Because what happens is the inflammation starts spreading. The inflammation causes tissue damage, then the damaged tissue becomes inflamed and creates more inflammation and damages more tissue, and you have this expanding whirlpool of damage that gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, one of my mentors used to always say over and over, inflammation resolves in fibrosis. That's what we see all the time, right?
Yeah.
And then it just causes this cascade. We've got other really cool things. The lasers are amazing for inflammation, but I want to talk about today, stacking it on the front end, like fish oils, maybe talk about the hemp a little bit and how
Sure.
the resolution and how that works. I think a lot of people don't understand that.
Okay. So as a base protocol, obviously you want to put someone on like the turmeric forte from MediHerb or the boswellia complex, because that'll modulate the inflammation, keep it at a manageable level. And the patient's going to want some type of relief. That's why they came in the first place. And if we tell them, well, it's probably going to take about 2 or 3 weeks for your pain to get to a manageable level, they're just going to go to CVS and buy something over the counter.
Yeah,
So
we were talking about some other really cool stuff too, but we can hit that for more acute stuff.
yeah, so with fish oils, we're familiar with the term essential oils, and they're called essential oils because we don't make them. So my question is, why don't we make them? We should make them, because every cell in our body, whether it's a bone cell or an eyelash cell or a skin cell or a liver cell, they're all made of a bilipid layer. In other words, the cell membrane of every cell in our body is made of essential fatty acids, predominantly EPA and DHA, which we get from fish oils. So you would think if that's what our body's made of, we would make it ourselves, but we don't. So it's really important that we have fish oils in the diet, and we've known for a long time that fish oils do something with inflammation, but we haven't really known exactly what. But in the recent decade, we found out a lot more about the biochemistry behind EPA and DHA and how it addresses inflammation. So when we take fish oils, if our liver and gallbladder are in good shape and we can metabolize those fats, they get broken down into different molecular substances downstream from digestion. So there are components in fish oils, have some weird names. They're called myrcins and resolvins, and these fall into the a larger category of what are called pro-resolving mediators. Okay, so there are some companies that make these as individual standalone products, but all fish oils contain them. If the person's metabolism is working correctly, or we get it to the point where it is and they can metabolize their fats easily, then you don't need to take a much more expensive standalone product. You can take fish oils, and your body will convert those fish oils into those pro-resolving
But
mediators.
not all fish oils are the same too. So that's the big thing too, because I have patients that go down to Costco and buy Kirkland brand or whatever, and they don't get the same results that I get when I use a good product.
No, and here's why. The fish oils themselves are not the issue. It's how they are manufactured and what they're put in. So what I mean by that is fish oils should be kept at cool temperatures, because we're talking about oils. Okay? And
The same thing that makes them beneficial makes them go rancid real easy, right?
Exactly. So here's the thing. If you have these big giant clear plastic bottles of fish oils that you buy at Costco or Walmart or local nutrition store or whatever, what's happening is light is shining into those bottles and it's oxidizing the fats inside those capsules, but you'll never smell it or taste it because it's in a sealed environment. No odor escapes. Then you take these rancid oils and pretty soon you're burping up things that defy description in their nastiness. So fish oil burps. That's one of two things. Either it's rancid fish oils, which you can't tell because, like I said, they're sealed in a capsule, or it's poor fatty acid metabolism, which is a gallbladder issue. And then you can give the patient things like beets if they want to eat beets. If they don't want to eat beets, which is most people, you can give them a product called AF beta food, which helps to metabolize the fats. Yeah, it works very well. But getting back to the fish oils, the retail stuff is generally in clear plastic bottles. They don't have the same type of compliance requirements that doctors' lines do. There's a higher level of manufacturing compliance on a doctor's level product than there is on a retail product, and that's very important to remember.
I know you guys. I could search any batch that you guys produce, right?
Yeah.
In a process.
Yep, you can.
Yeah.
You can look for adverse events. You can look for problems with individual batches based on the lot number, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all transparent, and if there is a problem, you can find out what it is and get it rectified. But by and large, we don't have any problems with these types of issues because all of our fish oils are protected in amber bottles that light can't penetrate, so they don't go rancid. You don't have to refrigerate them, but that's not a bad idea. And the other thing is that If you preserve the integrity of the oils themselves, then when you take them and they're broken down into these pro-resolving mediators we were talking about earlier, you can only get that from a good quality product. If the oil's rancid, then the molecular components, breakdown components of the EPA and DHA aren't going to be there because the oil's gone rancid. It's turned basically poison, and it's killed everything, and it's no good anymore.
So I test my patients for omega. There's a take-home test.
Yeah, the omega quant test. Yeah,
I mean, which is awesome. But I can tell you, like, most of my patients, they'll tell me that, they're taking tons of fish oil, they're eating fish, they're doing everything they're supposed to. They're testing low.
Yeah, you have to really eat a lot of high-fat fish like salmon or sardines or anchovies. No one eats sardines or anchovies except Scandinavian people. So, my wife is being one of them. Even she doesn't like them. So the point is when you do one of these omega quant tests, what you find out, even if you're taking fish oils once or twice a day, every day, your levels are generally quite low. And the layperson might ask, well, why is that the case if I'm taking them every day? Does that mean they're useless? No, it means that your metabolic need for them is higher and you're not meeting it. Yeah. And remember, again, every cell in our body is made out of that bilipid layers of fats. And so we really have to eat a lot of essential fatty acids in order to incorporate effective cellular repair. So now we're getting back to talking about inflammation again. If we're not repairing the cells, then by consequence, how are you going to repair the tissue? How are you going to repair the organ system? Because it's all made up of cells, right? Yeah. So if repair is not taking place on a cellular level and you're not providing the building blocks in sufficient amounts for that repair to take place, guess what? You can reduce inflammation and keep it down as long as you're willing to take the drugs or take the anti-inflammatory herbs. But when you stop doing that, because that cellular damage hasn't been repaired, which is what was causing the inflammation in the first place, guess what? It comes back. And then you just fall into this cycle of suppression but not repair. So getting back to what these pro-resolving mediators do, think of it as a construction site. And on a construction site, you have a foreman, right? He makes sure that if the electrical and plumbing is supposed to go in on Wednesday, the drywallers don't come in on Tuesday and board the walls up, and then the pipes and the wires can't go in. Okay, so it's sequential. The foreman makes sure everything takes place on the right day so that everything remains functional. With inflammation, it's very similar. It's a sequential process. And so when fish oils are downstream converted into these molecular compounds called resolvins and pro-resolving mediators, those kind of act like foremen on a construction site, and they usher in different classes of neutrophils, which are immune cells that actually initiate the repair on a cellular basis. So they say, okay, class 1 neutrophils go in, you guys clean up the injury site, you take care of all the proteinaceous scar tissue and everything else there that's causing the swelling and the heat and the pain, and some of them die on the battlefield, so then they're done, and class 2 neutrophils come in, and they clean up the dead class 1 neutrophils and continue the process of converting the proteins and waste products in the wound to things that can be excreted through the lymph system, et cetera, and they continue the repair process. But all this is taking place because A, we reduce the inflammation enough for it to start to happen, and B, we provided the fish oils, which in turn provide those molecular breakdown compounds that actually control the cellular repair process. And so when that all is allowed to take place, then you have resolution. You have tissue that is repaired and sufficiently healed so that the inflammatory process can then self-regulate back down again. And that's when you find that you can really work some clinical miracles with your patients, because now they have the freedom of movement in their joints that they didn't have before. Now it's pain-free or close to it. And now, as they go through life and go through the physical activities that create these aches and pains, they can repair correctly and not be hurt, in pain, and inflamed all the time. So really it's now a two-pronged process where we're providing anti-inflammatory herbs like we've always done, but now we're providing fish oils so that these fish oils can be broken down into those pro-resolving mediators and actually initiate the repair process. You're not going to repair tissue without fish oils. And as you mentioned, you have to take a lot of them. So we created a new line of fish oils that's called our Ulprima fish oils. These are highly concentrated, so you don't have to take 6 to 8 to 12 of them a day to affect this process. You only need to take 3 or 4. And they're not the size of a key fob, so you can actually swallow them. They're about the size of your little fingernail. So that's a big problem with fish oils, because to get sufficient amounts, you swallow these gigantic capsules.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of people that just can't do that. And so there are liquid preparations of fish oils that you can actually drink in a teaspoon, or a tablespoon, but
yeah,
no one's lining up to do that. It doesn't taste that great.
What about hemp? How does that play into this?
Actually, that's really important. And the reason that's important is because hemp fuels our endocannabinoid system. And so, people watching this may say, well, what's the endocannabinoid system? What it is it's a regulatory system. We only discovered it in the mid to late 1990s. So we haven't known about it for a very long period of time. A few decades, but that's comparatively short in the big scheme of things. And what they discovered about the endocannabinoid system is that our body makes molecular compounds that are almost identical to compounds in marijuana or hemp. Hemp is marijuana, marijuana is hemp. I know people get messed up over the nomenclature, but all hemp is cannabis sativa, which has been bred to have very low THC levels. It's still marijuana. Okay, so I'm going to say marijuana. I like saying marijuana better than hemp. So our body makes these compounds, and they're called endo, meaning internally produced, endocannabinoids. And they're called endocannabinoids because they look like, on a molecular level, the cannabinoids in marijuana. Cannabis cannabinoids. The phytochemistry in cannabis plants are called cannabinoids. So we make products that are very similar to that, chemicals that are very similar to that inside our own body. So now what does the endocannabinoid system do? It's kind of like the control module in a car engine, what mechanics call the brain of your engine. And it's a computer module, and that computer module controls the fuel-air mixture, that the spark plugs ignite, and make sure the pistons are timed correctly and the transmission shifts at the right time. In other words, it makes sure, via computer communication with the separate components of the engine, that everything runs at design specs. Okay? So it's a regulatory mechanism. And that's, for lack of a better analogy, that's exactly what the endocannabinoid system does in human physiology. It makes sure that everything's operating at design specs. So it's not a system like the vascular system or the digestive system where you can point out and go, there's the endocannabinoid system. It doesn't work that way. It's a cellular receptor site system, so it's distributed throughout the body. And you have CB1 and CB2 receptor sites. And depending on where cannabinoids bind to these receptor sites, you have different health promoting effects. So,
but one of those being inflammation resolution. Right?
Yeah. And so we've heard this rage about taking CBD for inflammation. Does CBD in and of itself actually reduce inflammation? To an extent. But what it does that's really not spoken of is it helps control the process of converting the EPA and DHA that we ate when we had our fish oils into those pro-resolving mediators, the myrcins and the other compounds that actually initiate the repair. So the endocannabinoid system is dominant in influencing our body's ability to make those molecules out of the fish oils we're taking. So with just 3 simple products, you can really change someone's life. You would give them the
fish oils,
Ulprima.
I love the Ulprima.
Yep.
And then turmeric forte. That stuff works unlike anything I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
I'd point over here because I think I had it up on the rack here. But yeah, and I mean that was those other things. I mean I'd taken different forms throughout my life. When that stuff came around, that stuff works. And then hemp those 3 right there, right?
Yeah, that's.
Or boswellia if it's more joint related.
Yeah, joint and very specifically joint and gut related inflammation. Boswellia works real well for that. if that's all the patient's dealing with. But you know as well as I do, a lot of patients walk in and it's not just their gut, it's their gut, their joints, everything hurts. Musculoskeletal system as a whole hurts. And so, as an interesting side point, there's a inflammatory master switch, so to speak. It's like what turns on the inflammatory process and accelerates its intensity. And it's a biochemical. It's called NF-kappa B, which is an abbreviation for a big, long, multisyllabic thing I'm not even going to begin to try to pronounce.
NF-kappa beta.
Yes. And what's interesting is researchers have been saying for years, look, if we could just find something to downregulate NF-kappa B and not necessarily turn that switch off, because you don't want to shut off all inflammation because it's actually a beneficial process, but to regulate it so that the patient has some degree of relief, and we get that downregulated enough to allow repair to take place, we would have a great drug. That's where their mind always goes. What's hilarious is that turmeric, or the curcuminoids, which are the active ingredients in turmeric, directly influence the modulation of NF-kappa B, lowers it. So when someone comes in, they said, look, my eyelashes hurt. Man, I hurt all over. There's nothing that doesn't hurt. That type of person needs that master switch turned down. And that's what the turmeric is going to do. And there's lots of turmerics out there. And they all talk about absorption. Well, ours has black pepper, so it's absorbed 70% better than this brand, and they all fight back and forth. Absorption is one thing. What really matters, and no one talks about this because their products aren't built this way, is how long can you keep it in the bloodstream and in solution, because that's where it works its magic. What's interesting about curcuminoids is that once they get into the bloodstream, all the blood eventually goes to the liver, and the liver disassembles those molecules and destroys them through phase 2 detoxification. That takes about 20 to 35 minutes after you ingest turmeric. So unless that turmeric is protected from degradation in the liver, you lose its benefit in 30 minutes. So unless you're going to take a capsule or a tablet or a capsule every 30 minutes all day long, you're not really going to accomplish much with it. So what Standard Process did was they armored the curcuminoids with fenugreek. And what the fenugreek does is it prevents those curcuminoids from being broken down in the liver, and it remains in circulation for, I think it was 4 to 6 hours. So you only need to take it 1 or 2 tablets twice a day, and it continues to work. Or eat Indian food all the time, whichever you like best. But that's why it works so well, and that's what makes the Standard Process Meteor brand dramatically different from the other brands that are out there.
Dramatically, that stuff works so well.
It is absorbable, but that's not the main point. Yes, it has to be absorbable, but it has to stay in circulation. Otherwise, you lose the benefit, even though it got absorbed. It's the liver that tears it apart. It's not, the issue is not, well, ours is more easily absorbable than theirs are. Yeah, but how do you keep it in solution? Let's not talk about that.
That's good to know.
So, yeah, the finer points are really important.
And then, I know we've gone on for a while here. We might be able to, we'll have to break this into 2. We'll have a part 1, part 2. I think we should just keep going though.
That's fine.
So I know you came in here and we talked about, some things for acute pain and helping people with, because, frankly, like you said, people come in, they are in crisis, they want to get out of pain now. Like, what else?
That's a great question, because, we know pain is caused from inflammation, but reducing inflammation to the point where someone's not feeling pain anymore, that takes a while. Yeah. And by a while, I mean 8 to 10 days. So what do we tell them in the meantime? Well, until all this stuff kicks in, go take some Tylenol. Go pop a couple Vicodin. No, that's not good advice. That's not what we want to do. So just as you said, when patients come in, what have they been conditioned to expect? I want my pain gone in 30 minutes after I take whatever I take for it. Is that possible in the natural world? Yes. Now I'm going to say right here and now, there are some forms of pain that are really severe. And
Well, and of course I'm a brain-based guy, but when we talk about like upstream stuff and that sort of pain, that's a whole nother thing, and no drugs touch that sort of thing.
no, but I mean, I'll be the first guy to admit, hey, there are instances where you're not going to accomplish what you need to accomplish without an opioid because the pain is that severe. But most of the time, we don't see patients that are in that much pain. Sometimes, but not always. So, is there something you can give a patient that will have a 30 to 45 minute onset and reduce their pain enough where they go, hey, I actually feel significantly better? Yes, there is. The product is called Nervagesic, and we know that an analgesic is something that reduces pain, so Nervagesic is nerve-based pain relief. So it's a combination of Jamaican dogwood, corydalis, and California poppy. So what's interesting is the California poppy, because it's in the poppy family. That's what they make opioids from.
Yeah.
It binds to the same cellular receptor sites as hydrocodone or oxycodone or anything that's made from an opiate base, but it doesn't have the euphoria, the addiction, the constipation, all the other things that are associated with narcotic therapies. So you're still signaling the same cellular access mechanisms that modulate the pain response in the brain, but you're not creating addiction, you're not creating constipation, you're not creating unnecessary euphoria. Euphoria is nice. That's nice, but then you have the addiction problem that comes with it. I want more euphoria. So it doesn't do that, which is nice. And the onset is about 35 to 45 minutes. And we're talking that's pain on 10 being incapacitating, 1 to 10, we're talking about dealing with pain from 1 to 6 or 7. And that's really where most people fall.
Most things. I mean, that's what people, when they're taking, over-the-counter NSAIDs and things like that, it's on that level.
Yeah.
And after that, they're in the emergency room. They're not they're not searching for, they're not going to CVS or whatever.
No.
But, I mean, I'm going to have we're going to have a whole nother talk of how I feel about, some of the medications that people are commonly using. Just not today, because that's a long one. But having a viable option, I mean, that's great.
Yeah, so ideally, you could put someone on the 3 products we mentioned: turmeric forte, one of the Oprima fish oils, and then the hemp oil complex. And they say, okay, when your pain is to the point where you feel you need to do something extra, you can take the Nervagesic on an as-needed basis every 3 to 4 hours, and they can take. I've taken up to 6 at one time, because I was in a lot of pain, and that much made me a little bit drowsy. Didn't affect my ability to drive or anything like that. It was just, if I could stop and pull under a tree and take a nap, I would have. So 3 or 4 is fine for most people. If they're sensitive, then 1 or 2. But there's no warnings about impairing motor function or anything like that. It's completely safe. It doesn't make you drowsy unless you take a whole bunch. So
it's not shutting down their ability to heal the tissues in their gut, and it's not
at all.
Causing liver problems and kidney problems. And
yeah, it's a very benign product. It's one of the few things I've seen that just reduces pain without some type of payback later.
Nice.
And that's the problem with a lot of these other things. Even if we're not talking about addiction and constipation and all that, you still get a cloudy head. It's harder to think clearly, and you're stuck with that as the price you pay for not being in pain. And if you're at home on a weekend and you're laid up on the couch, that really doesn't matter. You can binge watch Netflix while you're in pain and take your stuff and not worry about it. But if you have to go to work, like most of us do, then you need something that's not going to take you out upstairs as well. And that's where these types of compounds come in. They just relieve pain, and there's not all these detrimental costs you have to pay in order not to be in pain. And that's the biggest thing.
Anything else on those lines?
If someone's really inflamed, drinking hard alcohol as a method of pain relief is not a wise idea, because that creates more inflammation. I don't have anything against alcohol, but when someone, particularly when it's gut-based pain, hard liquor is something we really don't want to indulge in, because that's going to, it's very astringent in the gut. It's very caustic, and it's going to reduce the layers of the mucous membrane, the thickness of the mucous membrane layer in the stomach and in the intestinal system. And when you do that, then pathogenic bacteria can bind easier to the gut wall and create more inflammation. So it just creates this cascade of negativity and consequence that you could really do without. So when you're helping patients get through this inflammatory process, stay away from things like hard alcohol, excessive sugar intake, excessive refined carbohydrate intake, pastries, pasta, bread, etc., etc. All these things in excess can be inflammatory because they create gut inflammation, and the gut inflammation in turn spreads everywhere else. So, anti-inflammatory foods, leafy green vegetables, dark fruits like blackberries, blueberries, things of that nature. Essentially things that grew out of the earth that are still recognizable as such. Most of those things will reduce inflammation. But herbs are the best way to get it down to a manageable level, and then the fish oils and the hemp oils will help to facilitate the repair process, so the person can actually say, hey, not only do I not hurt anymore, but I've gained back my mobility, my function. I can work out again, or I can run again, or I can swim again, whatever the case may be. And it really can change the life of a patient, because after about a month and a half on that routine, and all I was taking for this was the Aprima EPA DHA, hemp oil complex, and turmeric forte. After about a month and a half of that, back on the free weight side of the gym, doing all the stuff I love to do, without being in pain to do it, and without suffering the next 2 days, because I was able to go in there and tear it up.
Nice.
That changed my life, and to me, that's really important, because I get if I don't work out. So
more.
So it really changed things, and so I think the worst state to be in is to be in pain all the time, and so many patients are in that state, and it just saps your life of joy. It just takes it away, because that's always in the back of your mind. You're always dealing with it, and it's a limiting factor that keeps us from living life as full as we could. So if you get someone's inflammation down and restore their physical structure to the point where they can feel halfway normal again, you've done a truly amazing thing for your patient.